As we digest the President's speech last night, leading educationist Professor Jonathan Jansen believes our leaders have dropped the ball on vaccines. And this is raising questions about decisive and transparent leadership. The professor is with me now on Tuesday lunchtime. Professor Jansen, good afternoon to you and welcome. Difficult times for all of us. What type and style of leadership then is needed, do you think?
Thanks, Jeremy. Look, I think, in any national and indeed in this case a global crisis, the one thing that government needs to do is build trust. Any government is to build trust with its citizens. And in order to do that, one of the most important things is openness in communication. Even when you don't know all the answers, even when you don't, in this case, have ready and adequate access to vaccines, people want to know, where do we stand? What do we have? What do we need to do? When does this end? And those are the kinds of questions that should animate any leadership in a crisis, and in particular, a crisis that threatens our very existence.
What's the danger of drawing a cloak over a subject, for instance, like the vaccines?
Well, one of the big dangers is, of course, that people are uncertain. They don't know what's happening. They don't know what's going to happen to them. They see relatives, friends, colleagues, neighbors dying. And when there is this veil of secrecy over government operations with respect to, in this case, vaccines, people panic. They lose trust in government, and they're much more susceptible, and this is very important, under those circumstances, to conspiracy theories, to alternative remedies. And we can't afford that, in a country in which we don't have the levels of education that lead more people to trust in science.
What is your sense, Professor Jansen, about the vaccine debate particularly? Do you think it's a question of government having the information and not disclosing it, or simply not having a plan or a strategy?
I think what happened is our government, unlike other governments such as Israel, Colombia, Algeria, and so on, got out of the starting blocks fairly late. Remember, South Africa's political culture is to always deal with the crisis as you see it in front of you. We don't do long-term planning. This country does not have a culture of long-term planning. And so I think government was caught with its proverbial pants down when everybody started to ask, okay, so you're putting this regime of harshness, of harsh measures, understandable in my view, but harsh measures on us. How do we get out of this? People are only prepared to take on hardship if they can see that your government is invested in getting you out of that hardship. And when other countries, we all watch television and you see other people, rolling up their sleeves and getting, a shot in the arm. And here we don't know what's going on. And now what makes it worse, in the absence of that kind of clear and advanced information, you hear stories about the Russian vaccines or the Chinese or the BRICS vaccines. And people are saying, wait a minute, what happened to these, proven vaccines such as, the Oxford and Pfizer and so on vaccines? So it just creates a muddle and a mess in which skepticism about and the loss of trust in government grows.
Just finally, Professor Jansen, what's the deficit then? What are the key questions, in your opinion, that we need answers to?
Well, I think the first thing that we need is not necessarily specific answers to everything, but a president that gets up there and doesn't just make a speech and walk away, is a president who sits there with expertise on both sides and says, I'm going to make very specific, give you specific information about what we know right now about vaccines and their availability, and we will answer any questions that you might have about which you're uncertain. But don't make a speech on a Monday night. Call everybody together and then disappear and wait for your operatives 2 or 3 days later to come and explain things. That rebuilds the trust. Consistent, open communication, level with the people, tell us what we don't know and what we can't have yet, and take their questions so that they can be reassured you're doing the right thing on behalf of the populace.
I'd like your view on one other issue very quickly, Professor Jansen. The next big concern, I imagine, is convincing people to take the vaccine. I keep coming back to a survey that was conducted a week or so ago by the Ipsos research company that suggested 47% of South Africans at this time are now sceptical about taking it, wondering about its effectiveness, its efficacy.
Well, there's a number of things that government can do to make sure that you overcome some of those deficits. The first is to take it yourself, to make it part of a public campaign, to reassure people that they will be well, to make sure prominent people, like yourself, Reddy Klabi, soccer stars, rugby greats, make sure that people can see that the people they hold in esteem and so on are doing that. But in the long term, the only way to do this is through education. You have to educate people. You've got to take away the ignorance and the mythology through education so that people learn how viruses, any pathogen in fact, works and what its effects can be and so on. But in the short term, government has a responsibility to make sure that it sets the example and builds the confidence in people to be less susceptible to these fears than they might otherwise be.
Professor Jonathan Jansen, as always, thank you very much indeed from Stellenbosch University.